Today we're going to read an excerpt from chapter 7. That's the chapter on Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson has a complicated legacy. And if you read the blog post back in 2021 where I covered Andrew Jackson, you probably noticed that I struggled with it. We talked about the Indian removal era, and there are a lot of different aspects that I felt I wanted to cover. So when I converted the blog post into an actual honest-to-goodness book chapter, it went through a significant revision. And the key reason is original sources and being able to find the original sources for some of these negotiations. The chapter is fascinating. The original source document I found, which was really the genesis for reinventing the chapter, was from the Choctaw Nation in what is present-day Mississippi. They had detailed the negotiation strategy that Jackson's team used at the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek. And they had almost hour by hour, kind of day by day account of what happened there. It is mind-blowing, it's fascinating, and it's complex. So I think you'll really enjoy that chapter. What I want to do, though, in my excerpt is help you understand why I took the approach that I did here and just kind of giving us a little bit of a background on what that is. So this will be a little bit of a longer excerpt, not too long, maybe 6-7 paragraphs or so. But I think it'll help you understand what you're going to get in that chapter and really understand the background for it. So here goes. None of the historians discuss Jackson's persuasive skill with the same rigor they discuss his battlefield accomplishments or political maneuvering. I think that's because they don't believe they need to. What struck me when reading modern accounts of the Indian removal era, and what strikes me about most history that I read, is the seeming inevitability of it all. Of course the United States would win. Of course the Indians didn't have a chance. Yes, we might waffle between images of indigenous people as bloodthirsty savages on one side and noble protectors of the land on the other, but there was never a doubt that American forces would prevail in the end. I call bullshit. What I learned about the Indian Removal Act in high school, probably like you, I learned that the United States government forcibly took lands from the Indians, always a singular group, and marched them across the deep South and across the Mississippi River to Indian Territory, now called Oklahoma, where the survivors struggled to subsist on low-quality reservation land. The story of Jackson's strategy toward indigenous people, especially the communication strategy, is much more complex and instructive than textbooks give it credit for. First, the Indians were never a singular group of people. Indigenous peoples living in the Americas organized themselves into hundreds of tribes, confederations, and nations, all with interlocking alliances, bitter rivalries, and complex economies. That remained true as Europeans arrived. Different indigenous groups would align or resist settlement efforts as their needs and interests warranted. Second, Indians and Europeans are not fully distinct or diametrically opposed groups, at least not for long after first contact. Populations intermarried routinely, especially in the Appalachian region. When you read about the indigenous leaders of that era, you can't help but notice how many of them are of mixed heritage, often having a Scottish or Irish father and an indigenous mother. Third, and perhaps most important, no one believed war with indigenous nations would be easy. The French, British, and Americans each allied with and fought against various indigenous peoples throughout colonial and early United States history. Indigenous warriors were respected and feared adversaries. Andrew Jackson knew this personally. He allied with indigenous nations in the Battle of New Orleans against the British in the War of 1812, who had their own indigenous fighters on their side. To summarize the situation on the ground, if you wanted a group of indigenous people to get out of the way for settlers, you'd be wise to persuade them rather than fight them. Additionally, the strategy you employed with one group may not be effective with another. Flexibility was key. Armed conflict was always an option, but unlike what we are led to believe, it wasn't the first choice. Even Jackson, perhaps especially Jackson, understood that. When you examine the Indian removal strategy with those eyes, a new picture emerges. I warn you, it won't be a more flattering portrayal of Jackson's actions, but it is perhaps a more useful one. That's it. Chapter 7 is mind blowing. I really enjoyed writing it. One of the things I liked about it is I can't add a lot to a discussion about battlefield techniques and all of those sort of things. If you want that, there are great military historians. Podcasters such as Dan Carlin are fantastic at that. They really can dig into that aspect. I can't add a whole lot to that, but what I can talk about is understanding the persuasive strategy and negotiation strategies. And that's what we talk about here, using the Choctaw sources and original Jackson sources, his letters and his documents, really give us a pretty clear picture of that kind of tit for tat, good cop, bad cop sort of negotiation strategy, the different way he kind of divided and conquered the different subgroups within the Choctaw Nation is fascinating. It's heartbreaking in a lot of ways, but it's an important read for any of us who really want to understand that era better, so we don't fucking do it again.